After leaving the army, Tony now runs a mechanic shop, leading a quiet life trying to support his daughters after their mother's death. This all comes crashing down when his impulsive younger brother Bobby pulls up in a sweet yellow Ferrari, wanting to take his brother for a drive.
Yo, bro!
I'm not going anywhere in this car with you.
He refuses to say where he got it, but unknown to Tony, the car belongs to a powerful crime boss named Dante, who just a few days ago lost his son and brutally killed the cop responsible for his death and walked away scot-free.
You don't mess with a man's family.
So Tony decides to join Bobby, and they hit the road, but not long after Bobby starts speeding. Tony urges him to slow down.
Easy, Bobby.
But Bobby won't listen and starts driving even more recklessly. Tony demands to know where he got the ride. He's being too reckless, and Tony reminds him they aren't kids anymore. He won't be cleaning up Bobby's messes any longer. Bobby wants to live a little. He's envious of Tony's seemingly perfect life.
I wish I had it all like you, Tony.
The hero Marine who now has the perfect job and family. But Tony reminds him everything he worked hard for. At that moment, Tony is the first to notice a car following them real close.
Friends of yours?
And points it out to Bobby, who gets scared and hits the gas. He claims to not be in any trouble, but Dante's men on his tail say otherwise. Bobby tries to lose the men with Tony hanging on for life in the front seat, but Bobby loses control and crashes. Both he and Tony's unconscious bodies are dragged from the wreck. When Tony wakes, he's bound to a chair sitting before Dante. Turns out the Ferrari was his favorite car, but he's not mad, as long as both Tony and Bobby can come up with 10 times the cost of the car, as per his rules. The car? $280,000, so math genius Dante works out Tony's debt to be $48 million.
$28 million!
Now Dante's not an unreasonable guy. He's willing to cut up to 90% of Tony's debt, only if he survives one round of Russian roulette. He hands Tony a pistol, but Tony has a thing against guns after, as a child, he witnessed his brother end himself.
I don't like guns.
Dante decides to help him out. He rests the gun to Tony's head, but the former Marine simply tells him to do it. Tony survives. So now his debt is only $2.8 million. Tony demands to know where Bobby is, demanding some proof that he's alive, so Dante shows him Bobby's ring, wondering if he would prefer an ear or finger. As for the debt, Dante decides that Tony will work for him until it's paid off, and if he refuses, then pieces of Bobby will start turning up at his home. Their convo is over, and Dante instructs Tony to be at his office 10 a.m. sharp. Tony gets home and checks on his daughters who are asleep, worried about what he might have gotten himself into. The next day, Tony turns up at Dante's place. His first job is to convince a Mexican gang, who's been operating on his turf trafficking people, to take their business elsewhere. Dante remembers he doesn't like guns, but Tony thinks he'll be just fine without one. Soon Tony turns up to the address, his choice of weapon a wrench. He approaches the location unaware that nearby Detective Boswell, who had been watching the home, has eyes on him. The first man to answer the door gets an early doctor's visit. Then Tony proceeds to beat down the other 2 guys inside with ease, warning the last one to leave the neighborhood. Tony then calls an ambulance to the location. On his way out, Boswell has his plate run. Tony gets back to his garage where his friend Eduardo can see that something is bothering him. Tony doesn't want to say, but Eduardo reassures him everything ends up working themselves out sooner or later. Hopefully sooner than later, as things are slowly going downhill. When he gets home, he wonders what his daughters think about just upping and leaving.
If you guys could go anywhere in the world you wanted to go.
Clearly worried about the situation he's in. Later he sits staring at a picture of his wife. He falls asleep with it there, and Sarah comes to tuck him into bed. Tony can't catch a break, as the next day Dante has another job for him. This time, it's some thugs downtown who are selling laced drugs and destroying his customer base, so he wants Tony to get rid of them and burn the place down. Tony turns up, wrench in hand, barges in and takes out just 3 guys at the location. Man, these gangs need an HR department. Tony then torches the place. Meanwhile, Boswell goes over Tony's military file, where it shows he was dishonorably discharged after refusing orders to shoot a hostile. He has no criminal record, which makes Boswell wonder how he got himself involved with Dante. Later, Tony stops by a diner to see his girlfriend Cheryl and tells her about the situation he's in with Dante. Cheryl knows these are bad dudes he's messing with, so she gives him an extra key to her apartment in case he needs somewhere to lay low. All this time, Boswell is nearby listening in on their conversation. Once Tony leaves, he approaches Cheryl wanting to know about Tony and his involvement with Dante, but Cheryl ain't never seen nothing, don't know nothing, and doesn't even know who Tony is. Seeing he won't get anything out of her, Boswell leaves his card in case her memory comes back. Later, he pulls up to Tony's garage, warning him that he's getting involved with some dangerous people. If he doesn't start talking, then next time they meet he'll be in cuffs. Tony denies knowing anything, and just then Dante calls like a clingy girlfriend. He meets with Dante at a shooting range to receive his next mission. Dante's accountant Jerry has been stealing money from him, so Dante wants Tony to blow his brains out.
Not a killer, Dante.
Tony reminds him he's no killer, but if he ever wants to see Bobby in one piece again, he needs to get the job done.
Do your job, then you'll see your brother.
Tony gets to the target's home that night, but when he sees Jerry's family come out to greet him, he realizes he's crossed a line. He tells Dante he is done. He's willing to find another way to pay off the debt, but if they hurt Bobby, then Dante will need to sleep with one eye open.
That's the deal.
This is where Dante orders the hitmen to go and shoot up Tony's house, but warns them not to hurt his family. Tony races back home as he knows trouble is on its way, but before he can get his girls packed, the hitmen pull up outside and gunshots begin to rip through the home. Tony and the girls get separated during the chaos. Sarah is brutally cut down in the hail of bullets. The house catches fire, and Tony barely manages to drag Sarah outside, but is unable to return for his youngest sunshine. Boswell arrives a while after to see Tony on his knees. He checks out the crime scene, but when he returns to talk to Tony, Tony has disappeared, and with Tony's military background, Boswell suspects a war is coming. When Dante hears about this, he is so mad he kills one of the hitmen. He lost his son, so he knows not to mess with a man's family, and if they don't want a war, they need to find Tony and kill him.
Finish what you started.
The funeral for Sarah takes place, but Tony is nowhere to be seen. Eduardo reassures Cheryl that he'll show up sooner or later, but when Eduardo returns to his truck, Tony is sitting in the back. It is during their conversation that Tony makes up his mind to go to war with Dante and his crew. We get a short training montage just because. Then the real action begins. He spots one of Dante's men standing outside a building, runs down on him, and begins to beat his ass until a woman stumbles upon the scene, allowing the man to run away. A while later, Boswell interviews the woman, who describes what she saw. He then goes back to talk to Cheryl. He wants her to understand that he is trying to help Tony, who has no idea what he is up against. She wonders what else a man is supposed to do after losing his family, but Boswell doesn't think keeping him in the dark will help Tony's case. That night, Tony is watching Dante spot from a distance when he sees none other than Bobby looking all cozy with Dante. Something's up, and he's going to find out what. Tony follows Bobby closely with his bright lights on, forcing him to pull over. He steps out like a tough guy but stops short when he sees it's Tony. Tony demands an explanation.
I'm sorry, Tony. I didn't know.
And Bobby reveals he's been working for Dante for a few years, told him how much of a badass he was, so they came up with a plan to get him to do some jobs. He swears he had nothing to do with his niece's deaths, but then in a narcissistic twist, Bobby starts blaming his brother for his crappy life. While Tony was the hero, Bobby struggled with drugs, and despite the help Tony gave to him, he doesn't feel it was enough.
Bobby.
I needed you, Tony.
Why can't you be more like Tony?
Turns out he was always envious of Tony after their father died and left him everything. After those words, Bobby is expecting to be punched in the face, but instead receives an apology from Tony. Feeling guilty, Bobby offers to help Tony get his revenge. Watching all this is one of Dante's guys who calls it in. Bobby thinks the best way to hurt Dante is to hit his cash spots, so Tony wants the addresses of all his businesses. He wants Bobby and Eduardo to stay at the safe house while things blow over, as he doesn't want anyone else getting hurt, and though Bobby wants to help, Tony insists. Eduardo and Bobby leave, but they're being followed. Tony's first stop is a strip joint owned by Dante. He enters, throws out the girls and kicks some guys around, ensuring Dante sees him on the cameras. Meanwhile, Eduardo and Bobby are at the safe house when the power goes out. It's a two-man hit team led by Dante's enforcer Marco, but Eduardo spots them on the cameras. The men trip a smoke grenade, allowing Bobby to launch a surprise attack on one of the men, while the other goes after Eduardo. Bobby defeats his attacker, but Eduardo is held at gunpoint and Bobby is knocked out. Tony shows up to Cheryl's place in the middle of the night. He wants her to have the garage if anything happens to him. Cheryl tells him about Boswell's offer to help, but Tony promises it'll be all over very soon. The next day, Tony sees Dante enter the club to take care of a deal. While he's inside, Tony enters and starts taking out the security there in quick succession. Dante's guards decide to move him, and by the time Tony gets outside, they're gone. Dante just lost $4 million because of him, so he sends some men to the garage. Boswell shows up to the garage to warn Tony. The cop Dante killed was his partner, and he was tortured for 4 days before he was killed, just a hint of how dangerous he is. Boswell saw what Tony can do, and despite having enough evidence to arrest him, he wants Dante gone too, and gives Tony the info they've gathered on the crime boss. Dante's hitmen pull up just then, and start unloading on the entire garage. Luckily, Boswell is able to return fire on the men with his unlimited magazine pistol, forcing the men to flee the scene. One of Tony's employees gets hit and is rushed off to the hospital. Boswell warns that Dante won't stop until he's dead, noting that most people would leave town after what just happened, but Tony isn't most people. The Marine in him will not let him walk away. Tony is at Cheryl's diner when Dante's right-hand Jasmine and Marco turn up. Tony is in the bathroom when Marco enters and attacks him with his insane strength. Marco's attacks end up breaking a toilet, flooding the bathroom floor. Tony's attacks are useless, but when Marco lifts him into the air, he is able to grab an electrical wire and shock Marco to death while holding onto the ceiling. He exits the bathroom, but is forced to escape gunfire when Jasmine enters, letting off shots at him. She corners him, but runs out of bullets, and her driver comes to take her away as sirens start approaching the diner. Tony takes Cheryl back to the safe house, where Eduardo and the other mechanics are working on something special for him. All this time, Bobby is being held captive by Dante. When the mechanics are through, they reveal their finished product, his old tow truck but now reinforced, with even mounted machine guns and a flamethrower. Eduardo also gives him a GPS watch and earpiece in case he needs backup. Dante then calls, threatening to end Bobby unless Tony shows up to his place that night. Later, Dante seems to have upped his budget as he has a small army of heavily armed men patrolling his place looking out for Tony. Tony sets out and Boswell decides to join him. The instant they pull up, the armed men open fire on the armored truck. But Tony drives right through them, busting down the gates. One guy steps out with a rocket launcher, but they get barbecued before Tony drives into the building, activates the guns, and begins to mow down the men who are so kind as to stand in front of a shooting truck. Eduardo still has to make a living in this movie, so they have him be the one to activate the guns. Boswell thought he didn't use guns, but Tony just doesn't like holding them. Most of the men are wiped out, so Tony and Boswell continue on foot, Tony using just his fists against guys with guns while Boswell is outmaneuvering so-called trained mercenaries. Somehow Bobby seems tired of waiting to be rescued, so he ends up breaking free and fighting off the men. Tony is attacked by a big man who knocks him down. The man is about to hit him with something heavy when Eduardo earns another paycheck by remotely firing the gun, killing the man. Tony takes a bullet for no reason defending Boswell, but they take out their attackers. Bobby runs into a man armed with a gun, but who decides to pick up 2 knives instead and gets his ass beat. A tired Tony then runs into Jasmine, who's been waiting for a round 2. He doesn't fight girls, but when she hits him with 2 cheap shots, he decides to give her some equality and throw her through the damn window. He He goes looking for Dante, who holds a gun to him, planning to finish him off for good this time. But while he decides to monologue, Bobby shoots him dead. Tony tells him he did good, and they leave together. Tony drives to Cheryl's home and passes out in the truck. She comes out to see him there the next morning, and he hugs her, telling her it's over, and I'm glad this recap is over as well. In the end, Tony goes to visit his daughter's graves. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time, go ahead and hit that like button, drop a comment, and of course, subscribe for more recaps just like this. And hey, don't click away just yet. YouTube thinks you'll love one of these 2 videos popping up right here, so check them out next.